This is what happened when researchers stopped testing milk the way the dairy industry tests it, and started looking for what nobody was supposed to find. Scientists at Emory University purchased 69 samples of milk from grocery stores across the country in 2019, and they ran tests that the FDA's system was never designed to run. The standard government screening only checks for a handful of antibiotics at regulatory action levels. The Emory team used analytical chemistry sensitive enough to detect parts per trillion, and they searched for everything, from antibiotics and pesticides to growth hormones and contaminants that fall outside the official testing window. What showed up in conventional milk rewrote the conversation. 60% of samples contained antibiotics. Up to 60% carried current-use pesticides. Bovine growth hormone levels ran 20 times higher than what appeared in organic milk. The organic samples told a different story entirely, with 0 antibiotics and 0 current-use pesticides detected. And here's what makes those numbers so uncomfortable. While the Emory researchers were finding contamination in more than half their samples, the FDA's official testing system reported a violation rate of less than 0.01%. Both numbers are real, and both are accurate. The difference comes down to what you test for and how hard you look. That gap between what the government measures and what's actually sitting in your glass is the story of milk safety in America, and it starts with a hormone that the rest of the developed world refused to touch. November of 1993 brought FDA approval for a product called Posilac, manufactured by Monsanto. Posilac was the brand name for recombinant bovine growth hormone, known as rBGH or rBST, a genetically engineered version of the natural pituitary hormone found in cows. An injection every 2 weeks pushed milk production up by 10 to 15%. 4 companies had poured over $1 billion into developing it. Monsanto, American Cyanamid, Eli Lilly, and Upjohn all raced to bring it to market, and Monsanto crossed the finish line first. Commercial sales of Posilac began on February 4, 1994. The FDA's position could not have been more direct. Their 1993 press release on the approval stated that there is no significant difference between milk from treated and untreated cows. And here's what the rest of the world thought about that claim. 3 years before the FDA even approved Posilac, the European Union imposed a moratorium on rBST in 1990. By December of 1999, the EU made that ban permanent, pointing to animal welfare concerns like increased mastitis, lameness, and reproductive disorders in treated cows. Canada's health department rejected it in January of 1999, after their expert panel documented a 50% increase in clinical lameness and a 25% increase in mastitis among treated herds. Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina all turned it down. The Codex Alimentarius, which serves as the United Nations food safety body, attempted 3 separate times to approve rBGH, and 3 times they failed to reach consensus before shelving the proposal entirely. That amounts to a global non-endorsement. Among developed nations, the United States stood alone in approving this hormone, and the people who signed off on it carried some interesting career histories. The name that keeps surfacing in this story is Michael R. Taylor, and his career path reads like a map of the space between the regulator and the regulated. From 1976 to 1980, Taylor served as an FDA staff attorney. He then left for King & Spalding, a law firm that represented Monsanto, where he worked from 1981 to 1991. After a decade representing Monsanto's interests, he returned to the FDA as Deputy Commissioner for Policy, the position where he authored the rBGH labeling guidelines. From the FDA, Taylor moved to the USDA. From the USDA, he went to Monsanto as Vice President for Public Policy. And after his time at Monsanto, he returned to the FDA once more as Deputy Commissioner for Foods. A 1994 GAO investigation determined that his Monsanto connections did not constitute a formal conflict of interest, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. Marion Nestle, a professor of food studies at NYU, put it bluntly when she called Taylor the first person whose name is mentioned when anyone talks about the revolving door between the food industry and government. Taylor wasn't the only one making that trip between Monsanto and the FDA. Margaret Miller worked as a Monsanto research scientist on rBGH safety studies until 1989, then became deputy director of the FDA's Office of New Animal Drugs, where she reportedly reviewed the same safety report she had helped produce at her former employer. Suzanne Session, who served as the primary FDA reviewer for rBGH, had conducted Monsanto-funded research at Cornell before taking that position. What unfolded in Canada painted an even stranger picture. 3 Health Canada scientists, Dr. Shiv Chopra, Dr. Margaret Hayden, and Dr. Gerard Lambert, testified before the Canadian Senate in 1998 that managers had pressured them to approve rBGH without adequate evidence. Hayden's testimony included an allegation that Monsanto officials offered Health Canada scientists $1 to $2 million, which she described as an attempted bribe. Monsanto denied the allegation, and it was never independently confirmed. All 3 scientists were terminated in June of 2004 for what Health Canada labeled insubordination. Canada had rejected rBST 5 months after their Senate testimony. Chopra later framed it as a moral obligation, saying it's not just our right, it's our obligation to blow the whistle, and calling it a matter of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Two investigative reporters at WTVT, Fox 13 in Tampa, Florida, Jane Acri and Steve Wilson, assembled an exposé on rBGH and the milk supply during 1997. Before the piece could air, Monsanto's law firm sent a letter to Fox News chairman Roger Ailes that warned of, and this is their language, serious damage to Monsanto and dire consequences for Fox News. Over the next 8 months or so, the story went through 83 rewrites. On December 2, 1997, both reporters were fired. The jury reached a unanimous verdict that Fox acted intentionally and deliberately to falsify or distort the plaintiff's news reporting on BGH, and Acri received an award of $425,000. An appeals court overturned that verdict in 2003. Wilson later captured the chilling effect of the case when he asked, what reporter is going to challenge a network if the station can retaliate by suing the reporter to oblivion the way the courts are letting them do to us? Despite the legal outcome, Acri and Wilson received the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2001 for their reporting efforts. Monsanto didn't limit its defense of rBGH to regulatory agencies. They targeted anyone who tried to tell consumers what wasn't in their milk. December of 2003 brought a lawsuit against Oakhurst Dairy in Maine, a family-owned operation, for labeling its milk as rBGH-free. Monsanto spokesperson Jennifer Garrett told the press that Oakhurst's labels deceived consumers by marketing a perception that one milk product is safer or of higher quality than other milk. Oakhurst's president Stanley Bennett framed it differently. He called it a question of free speech, adding that the world seems a little bit discombobulated when somebody attempts to prohibit you from doing the right thing. Oakhurst settled the case by adding the FDA's required disclaimer, which reads that no significant difference has been shown between milk derived from RBST-treated and non-RBST-treated cows. 4 years later, in 2007, Monsanto filed complaints with the FTC and the FDA against multiple dairies that used rBGH-free labels, and they lobbied Pennsylvania to ban such labels entirely. Public backlash forced Pennsylvania to reverse course, and the FTC sided with the dairy producers. And that's when something notable happened in Ohio. A court in 2010 found a compositional difference between rBGH and non-rBGH milk, which directly undercut the FDA's long-standing no significant difference position. None of that mattered by then, because the market had already delivered its own verdict. Kroger dropped rBGH from its store brands in 2007, and Safeway followed that same year. Walmart cut it in 2008, and Starbucks matched them the same year. By 2009, more than half of the nation's 100 largest dairies had discontinued use entirely. The decline showed up clearly in the numbers. 22.3% of all U.S. cows received rBGH in 2002, and that figure fell to 17.2% by 2007. By 2014, just 9.7% of dairy operations still used it, and that's when Monsanto walked away. On August 20, 2008, they sold Posilac to Eli Lilly's Elanco division for $300 million. A decade later, Elanco sold it to Unregulated, a Brazilian company, which effectively marked the end of rBGH in America. Regulators didn't remove it, and Congress didn't ban it. Consumers refused to buy it. The rBGH-free dairy market reached an estimated $7.53 billion in 2023, which tells you everything about where consumer trust landed. Monsanto's own packaging for Posilac had listed 21 health problems in treated cows, including cystic ovaries, uterine disorders, decreased gestation length, increased twinning, and retained placenta. All of that appeared right on the label. 40% of farmers who initially tried rBGH gave it up, because the economics didn't deliver what Monsanto had advertised. One New York farmer named John Shumway reportedly lost around $100,000 replacing 50 cows after adverse Posilac reactions. A Monsanto spokesman once claimed about a third of dairy cows lived in herds using Posilac. Today that number sits near zero. The end of rBGH didn't empty the pharmacy in your milk. It just shifted attention to everything else sitting in there. Antibiotics come first in that conversation. Mastitis, which is an infection of the udder, ranks as the most common disease in dairy cows, and the standard treatment involves antibiotics. Most often beta-lactams like penicillin and ceftiofur, infused directly into the udder. Farmers are required to observe withdrawal periods after treatment, meaning there has to be a gap between the last dose and the next milking that enters the supply chain. When that system works correctly, residues stay out of your glass. The FDA's National Milk Drug Residue Database reports that the system works well. Out of roughly 3.7 million samples tested in fiscal year 2023, just 345 came back positive, which amounts to a violation rate of 0.009%, the lowest ever recorded. Any tanker that tests positive gets rejected for human consumption and disposed of. But here's where the gap opens up. That system tests primarily for beta-lactam antibiotics at regulatory action levels, and the Emory researchers tested for a broader range of drugs at much lower detection thresholds. What they found were sulfonamides in 37% of conventional milk samples, specifically sulfamethazine and sulfathiazole. Both compounds are banned for use in lactating dairy cows, which means they should never appear in milk at all. A 2024 systematic review covering over 411,000 raw milk samples globally found tetracyclines in nearly 44% of studies, with beta-lactams and sulfonamides each appearing in about 31%. The overall positive rate across all those samples sat at 0.21%, which sounds low until you realize it represents thousands of positive samples worldwide. Now for the pesticides. Chlorpyrifos turned up in 59% of conventional milk samples in the Emory study, diazinon in 60%, cypermethrin in 49%, permethrin in 46%, and atrazine in 26%. All of them enter through contaminated feed and forage. Lipophilic compounds, meaning fat-loving chemicals, bioaccumulate in cow tissue and partition into milk fat. Legacy pesticides like DDT metabolites and hexachlorobenzene appeared in nearly all samples, regardless of whether they were organic or conventional, because these are remnants of chemicals banned decades ago that still cycle through the environment. The FDA's own fiscal year 2023 pesticide residue monitoring program tested 38 milk samples and found 0 violative residues, with 87.4% showing no detectable residues at all. 38 samples out of a dairy industry producing 231 billion pounds of milk a year. And then there are contaminants that weren't on anyone's radar until very recently. Microplastics showed up in 72% of milk samples in a 2022 Dutch pilot study. A 2025 study published in Nature measured concentrations of 350 microplastic particles per kilogram in milk and up to 1,857 per kilogram in ripened cheese. Baby formula powder carried even higher levels, with some studies reporting up to 10,040 microplastic particles per kilogram. Italian researchers traced one contamination pathway by finding 39,300 microplastic particles per kilogram in the ryegrass hay fed to dairy cattle. The contamination begins before the cow even produces the milk. Research into microplastics in milk only began in 2020, and the methods for measuring them still haven't been standardized. PFAS, which are commonly called forever chemicals, proved equally pervasive. The 2025 study in Environmental Science and Technology detected 26 of 32 PFAS compounds in more than 40% of milk samples across 15 countries, and German testing found PFAS excess in 98% of samples with PFAS in 96%. No federal limits exist for PFAS in milk anywhere in the United States. Only Maine has set an action level, which covers PFAS at 210 nanograms per liter. That's one state covering one compound in a chemical class numbering in the thousands. Aflatoxin M1, classified as a Group 1 carcinogen, appeared at an overall prevalence of 66.2% in dairy products globally, according to a 2025 umbrella review. The FDA's action level for aflatoxin M1 stands at 0.5 micrograms per kilogram, which is 10 times higher than what the EU permits. Pasteurization destroys none of these emerging contaminants. Spring of 2024 delivered something that caught virologists off guard. H5N1 bird flu appeared in dairy cattle for the first time, detected in Texas, in an animal that scientists hadn't even considered a susceptible host. By 2025, over 972 dairy farms across 16 states had reported positive herds. Viral RNA fragments turned up in as many as 36.3% of pasteurized retail milk samples, though no live virus appeared in any pasteurized product. Multiple studies confirmed that pasteurization kills the virus, but Cornell researchers found it persists in raw milk for up to 8 weeks at refrigeration temperatures. And that's when the testing infrastructure took an unexpected hit. On April 21, 2025, the FDA suspended its Grade A milk proficiency testing program, which is the quality assurance system that checks whether labs are testing milk accurately. Actual milk testing continues. What got cut was the program that verifies whether that testing works correctly. The industry maintains everything is fine, but pulling back the system that checks the system at the exact moment a novel virus is moving through dairy herds deserves attention. The antibiotics picture, on the other hand, shows genuine improvement. Full implementation of the FDA's Guidance for Industry 213 took effect on January 1, 2017, eliminating all growth promotion uses of medically important antibiotics. Livestock antibiotic sales dropped 33% in a single year and fell 43% from 2015 levels. Drug residue positives in milk have declined for 7 or more consecutive years, and that counts as real progress. Organic dairy continues to expand alongside that progress. U.S. organic milk demand reached approximately $9.1 billion in 2025, with organic whole milk sales climbing 15.5% year over year. Once again, consumers are voting with their wallets. Before the pasteurized milk ordinance existed, 1 in 4 foodborne illnesses trace back to dairy. Today, milk accounts for less than 1% of foodborne outbreaks, with fewer than one person getting sick per 2 billion servings. By that measure alone, the system works. But the question this video raises isn't whether your milk will make you sick tomorrow. The question is, what's in there that nobody is required to look for? The FDA tests roughly 3.7 million samples a year for a handful of antibiotics. Independent researchers tested 69 samples for everything and found contamination in more than half of them. Back in 1992, a GAO report identified 82 drugs known or suspected of being used on dairy cows that could leave residues in milk, and the FDA at that time tested for only a limited number. 62 of those drugs weren't even approved for use in dairy cows. That report came out over 3 decades ago. Since then, microplastics, PFAS forever chemicals, and a bird flu virus capable of jumping species have all joined the list of things turning up in the milk supply. 25 years passed with the United States standing as the only major developed nation to approve a growth hormone that the EU, Canada, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand all rejected. Consumer pressure, not regulators, is what finally removed it. The rBGH story is really a story about who gets to decide what counts as safe. It could be the agency where former Monsanto executives authored the labeling rules. It could be the Codex Alimentarius, which couldn't bring itself to endorse the product across 3 separate attempts. Or it could be you, standing in the dairy aisle, reading the label, and choosing what goes into your body and the bodies of the people you feed. When Oakhurst Dairy's president faced a Monsanto lawsuit for telling consumers what wasn't in his milk, he called it a question of free speech. It's also a question of information. The cocktail in your milk isn't the one you ordered, but knowing it's there is the first step towards sending it back. I appreciate you sticking with this one all the way through. These videos take a long time to put together, and the fact that you gave it time in your day means a lot. If you found it useful, or if it changed the way you look at something you've been buying your whole life, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure the next one reaches you. We cover stories like this regularly, digging into the things that affect your health, your food, and the choices nobody told you that you needed to make. There's a playlist right on your screen if you're not ready to stop just yet, and I think you'll find the next one just as eye-opening. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.